Yeah, welcome everyone to this evening's talk. This is my talk on basically my job in Malta. So I'm the BirdLife Malta Conservation Coordinator. I've been in this role since 2017, and my main role is to investigate the illegal killing of birds. And this includes both hunting and trapping. So first of all, where is Malta? Okay, so Malta's in the south of Europe. It's a country in the Mediterranean. It's down here. It's very small. It's one of the smallest countries in Europe. But as you can see, the positioning, it's in between Italy and Africa. And because of the positioning, it makes it a very important migratory flyway for many species of birds. This is a close-up of the islands. So we have the main one, which is Malta, and then there's the smaller sister island, if you like, called Gozo. Both of these are inhabited by, quite a number of people. Malta is actually the highest densely populated country as well. So not only do we have the hunting and trapping pressures on birds, but we also have, unfortunately, construction as well. So these issues together are quite tricky for bird life. In the middle, you can see there's a very small island, and this is known as Camino, and this is designated as a bird sanctuary. So there's no hunting and no trapping allowed on this island, at least. In the corner, I've put a picture of the blue rock thrush, which is Malta's national bird. So, as I explained, it's a very small island, and but there are 48 recorded species breeding on the islands as of the last breeding bird atlas, which was done in 2018. So one of them is the short-eared owl. This is a species that fluctuates between years. Some years we have none, other years we have maybe a couple of pairs. Whereas we have the Sardinian warbler, which is it's a very common resident species. So this is a bird we see all year round. And then we have the peregrine falcon. And if you've ever heard a bird called the Maltese falcon, it's actually, it is the peregrine falcon, basically. And this species was unfortunately shot to extinction as a breeding species in Malta. But luckily in the last few years, this bird has been making a bit of a comeback, not in great numbers, but every year now they're becoming a bit more established as a breeding species, but still in small numbers. And then unfortunately, there's two other species which were quite common as breeding species. One was the Eurasian jackdaw, and the other was the barn owl. And unfortunately, these two species were also shot to extinction as a breeding species in Malta. So yeah, as I explained, it's a very important stepping stone for bird migration, and on a very good day, you can see the migration here can be very impressive. So there are 3 derogations in Malta that would otherwise go against the EU Birds Directive. The first one is the spring hunting of common quail and turtle dove. The second one is the trapping of golden plover and song thrush. And the third one is the trapping and release of finches. I've put the release in quotations, which I'll explain a bit later. So just to run through each one, we've got the spring hunting of common quail and turtle dove. Malta is actually the only country in the EU that still allows the spring hunting season. And because of this reason, it's actually highly controversial. This is something that we as BirdLife Malta, we've been trying to stop for many years. And actually in a few of the years we did succeed and the season did not open. But the last few years, unfortunately, it's been happening every year. And up until, well, 2017, turtle dove and common quail were both legally shot. But then the IUCN actually reclassified the turtle dove as vulnerable to extinction. So it was taken off. We had a few years where it was only the quail that could be shot. But as of this year, this spring, the government, unfortunately, they put turtle dove back on as a huntable species. And yeah, so we are trying to fight this, of course, because it doesn't make sense to shoot birds in the spring regardless. especially when you're talking both species are actually in decline, and it does not make sense to shoot any bird when they're actually traveling towards their breeding ground, which will help increase the numbers of that species. And we know that it's not just common quail and turtle dove being shot in the spring. We unfortunately do receive many other shot birds in this time. So the second derogation is the trapping of golden plover and song thrush. Their seasons open at slightly different times, but combined, the trapping season is open here from the 20th of October until the 10th of January. And the use of electronic callers is prohibited. These callers are banned for both purposes, so they can't use them for hunting and trapping. But unfortunately, this is it's a highly unregulated practice, and it's really common to go out in the countryside in Malta at night, and you would hear these callers everywhere in the countryside. Basically, it's not regulated at all. But on their trapping sites, they are allowed to use a mixture of plastic and live decoys. So this picture depicts a very typical trapping site setup. They use clap nets, so the nets lie on the ground, and then usually the trapper will sit in a small trapping hide, and basically it will be operated by hand. So when the birds land in the middle, he will pull the string, and then the nets will go over on top of the birds. And yeah, it's quite common that you see either the plastic decoys dotted around, or you see live decoys in cages as well around. So this is the trapping and release of finches derogation. When Malta joined the EU in 2004, it was actually one of the requirements of joining the EU to phase out finch trapping, and they had 5 years to do this. So 2009 was the last year they were allowed to do this. 2010, the season stopped. Basically, the season will stop for finch trapping between 2010 and 2013. But in 2014 until 2017, the government managed to bring it back. So we were then in the situation again where we had finch trappers in the countryside. And luckily, the EU did take note of this, and they took Malta to the European Court of Justice in 2018, and the practice was deemed to be illegal. So for 2 years, we had no finch trapping occurring in Malta. But as of 2020, the government have managed to find a loophole in this derogation, whereby it's now a scientific study. And what this means is that you have the same number of trappers, same number of active sites. They catch the finches. They look for rings on the bird's legs. And if they're bearing a ring, they have to make notes of the country and the number, and then they have to let them go. And for the birds that are not ringed, they also have to record how many of which species and the number, and they also then have to let these birds go. So basically, they are not allowed to keep any of the birds that they're catching. But we know from our field work, and this is something I'm very busy with at the moment, I'm out looking for finch trappers every day at the moment, we know that this isn't the case. They still, the urge to keep these birds is so strong. We know they're not releasing them. And they're allowed to use the live decoys. This is a typical this is a typical scene in the Maltese countryside at the moment. So you see finches in small cages, and they can use up to 21. And for this derogation, they are allowed to use electronic callers, because this practice is not deemed to be either hunting or trapping, so therefore it's allowed. And then this is not a derogation, but I've put this in anyway. So there's also the autumn hunting season. This is open for 5 months, and it's open from the 1st of September until the end of January. So 40 species are allowed to be hunted from land and another 12 from sea. The turtle dove is only allowed to be hunted during September. And so for the autumn, they can shoot 500 birds. One thing I didn't mention earlier, in the spring, they can shoot 1,500 turtle doves. So straight away, you can see that this does not make sense, because why would they be allowed to shoot more birds in the spring when they're traveling to their breeding grounds? rather than in the autumn when, in theory, the turtle doves should be in higher numbers. So again, this is something we're trying to contest for the spring hunting, and actually BirdLife Malta, we are now taking the government to court over the spring hunting season, and specifically on the opening of the turtle dove season. It doesn't make sense. And one other thing to mention, they also have a rabbit hunting season. So the rabbit hunting season opens from the 1st of January until the, 1st of June until the end of the year. So actually most months in Malta, we have of some kind, there's a hunting season open. So as said at the beginning, BirdLife Malta is part of BirdLife International. So we are part of the biggest NGO for wildlife in the world, which means it's we're a small country, and we're a small NGO, but it's nice to be part of a bigger partnership. And we do work closely with other countries who are also struggling with wildlife crime in their countries. So with BirdLife Cyprus, the Italian partner as well, we do collaborate as well. So yeah, it definitely helps. So my role as conservation coordinator, just to run through a few points quickly. The first one is to undertake field surveillance operations relating to the illegal killing of birds. And then as well as investigating wildlife crime, we also have a rehabilitation centre, and we have an injured bird number that people can call any time of the day. So if they find an injured bird in the countryside or they want to report a wildlife crime, they can ring this number. Then we also organise volunteer camps during the peak migration seasons, which are the spring and the autumn. And then with the investigating of the crime, we pass it on to the police as well. And then when we pass it on to the police, the ideal situation is that what we've reported ends up in court. So, I mean, this month alone in November, I'm appearing in court on 4 different days, and they can be a whole day of testifying. So it takes up a lot of time, but ultimately this is the whole reason for doing this job. Yeah, and then it's not just wildlife crime I do. So in the summer, we also have issues with baby swifts, basically jumping out of their nest too prematurely because it gets very hot here. So I become a swift parent as well for a few weeks of the year, and it's always quite fun actually, and it's nice to be able to get swifts back into the wild, which otherwise, this is another species in decline. Here we have pallid and common swift breeding. So it's nice to be able to help these species as well. And then we also have problems with stranded shearwaters, because when the young leave their nest, their instinct is to go towards lights. And if there's areas here where the light pollution is very bad, it's quite normal that these shearwaters will just fly towards the lights, and they will end up on people's hotel balconies, for example, and then we go out and pick up the shearwaters, we ring them, and then we release them in areas where the light pollution isn't so bad. So just a bit on the hunting. Unfortunately, since I've joined BirdLife Malta, and I would like to say it's got nothing to do with me joining BirdLife Malta, it's actually got worse. So you can see between the period of 2013 to 2017, BirdLife picked up 266 shot protected birds. But if we compare it between 2018 and 2022, that figure has risen dramatically to 700. Should have said at the beginning, there are a few pictures in this talk which unfortunately are not very nice, but this is part of the territory, I'm afraid, when it comes to wildlife crime. So this is one of the birds we picked up in the spring. As I mentioned earlier, it's not just common quail and turtle dove which are shot, unfortunately. We picked up this osprey. This was actually found by a tourist. So someone coming here on holiday, they found this bird, but luckily they still knew to call us, and we got this bird. Then there was this honey buzzard. This was picked up in the autumn hunting season this year. Then there was also this greater flamingo, and this bird was actually found at sea, and it was a fisherman who found it. And unfortunately, none of these birds survived. As you can see, their injuries are too bad, and there's nothing we could do for them. Sorry, it's stuck a bit. Okay. And then during raptor camp, I had a phone call from someone who was just walking down the footpath. This is in Berzabuja, which is the south of Malta. And they called me, and I managed to pick up this bird. I was expecting it to be gone by the time I got there, but I managed to retrieve it. And this bird was confirmed shot. And it's not just the birds we retrieve, it's also birds in flight. So this is a hobby, and you can see that one of the flight feathers is sticking up, and this is a sign that this bird has been illegally shot at. There's no way that this bird would have got the feathers like this otherwise. And then also sometimes you see birds like this as well. So this is a grey heron. It's actually only had one leg, and then the other one was dangling. So when you see a bird like this, unfortunately, unless it lands somewhere, there's nothing we can actually do. But these birds reaching their final destination, the chances are so low, because migration is such a difficult thing for any bird to undertake. They need to be in top condition. So if a bird is like this, I don't think it would be able to make it. Okay, so I've got one video here. This is from Spring Watch this year. This is just about, we had one night where we had a lot of roosting marsh harriers. So hopefully this will work.
Today is the 19th of April 2022, and last night on the 18th we were watching these marsh harriers come into roost at Eleonora, Tassilge, and we saw many cars driving past, people watching. This morning we come to see whether they leave their roost, and we found 4 live marsh harriers injured and 1 dead. This is happening obviously because changes in taxidermy law mean that an embalmed marsh harrier can be exchanged between many different owners, and this hunting derogation in spring should allow for quail and turtle dove hunting only, not marsh harriers, and not after midday. As you can see, this is an infringement of the law. I wonder, do they hover around and is it because they're picky about where to roost? Yeah.
This one's got a big chunk missing out of its tail. And these are the fields where the harriers roosted last night and were shot during the night. We found 5 birds here, 4 are still alive, 1 dead. We saw 10 leave the valley, generally 5 from this area, and the police have arrived, collected the birds, and now are searching the fields for more birds.
you want to make a move.
Oops, sorry, let me try and get that. Okay, so from the 4 live March harriers that you saw there, unfortunately 3 had to be put to sleep. But one of them we did actually manage to rehabilitate. So yeah, here's the picture of the 4 together. And the one that we managed to rehabilitate, we actually took this bird to Sicily and we released it there because it's safer, basically. It's quite an extreme measure, but it's something we've started to do more. And this is the bird when it was released afterwards. And yeah, so another case that I wanted to mention was also a satellite tagged honey buzzard. So this is the honey buzzard that was on the nest. This is a picture of where it was hatched, and this is in Finland. This bird, yes, as I say, was satellite tagged. So you can see the route that it took here. It took 3 weeks basically between leaving Finland and reaching Malta, and across many countries on the way. It went across Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Hungary, and then it spent a few days as well in Sicily. And then on the 8th of October, this bird made the crossing to Malta, and it arrived in the late afternoon. And we know that if we see birds of prey arriving in the late afternoon, they're not going to continue to migrate that day. They're going to roost. And if a bird roosts, then the chance of being illegally killed are higher. And so this is the bird that was taken by some of the local bird watchers here. You can see the satellite tracker on the back. But unfortunately, this bird's signal, it remained static for quite some hours, and that basically rang the alarm bells, not just of us, but also of the Finnish ringer who fitted this tag, because at that point we had managed to get in contact with him just to say, we think one of your birds is here. So he was able to pinpoint exactly where this bird was, and we got the police in, and this bird was recovered, unfortunately, from a private garden in Rabat, which is close to an area called Busquets, and it's Busquets where most of the raptors in the autumn go to roost. The person who owned this garden, he had no idea. So suddenly the police turn up and BirdLife turn up, and we went into his garden and we collected this bird, and it was confirmed shot. Another story I just wanted to mention as well was one that we had a few years ago with flamingos. We had a bird that was basically had landed in an area of Malta, and someone got to the bird before we did, and they actually pulled some of the feathers out of the wing, so the bird couldn't fly, and they caused permanent damage to this bird. Anyway, we managed to get this bird and we released it into our nature reserve. One of them, called Adira, is in the north of the island. And this bird just never left. It stayed for many months, and we just kind of assumed it was just unable to fly. But then we started seeing it do test flights around the reserve. So we thought, okay, good, this bird will eventually leave. And one morning, yes, it had gone. And when we received this bird, it was grey like this, one of the juveniles. But as we had the bird longer and longer, it became a full adult, and it became pink. And unfortunately, it became more valuable because it now looks like an adult. And the morning where the bird disappeared, we all thought it had gone, so no cause for concern. But one of the wardens at our reserve, he started doing patrols of the boundary, and what he found was there was a fresh feather here. He saw a fresh shotgun cartridge. The fence you can see in the background, this is the boundary of the reserve, and there were these fresh tire tracks. Suddenly we went from feeling hopeful and optimistic that this bird had finally gone to the sad realization that actually this bird someone had broken into our reserve and they had taken this bird, basically. And this is the reason why so many of these species are being hunted. It's taxidermy. Unfortunately, a bird like a flamingo, an adult flamingo, can fetch thousands on the black market, basically. So if you just look at this person's collection, this is quite a standard collection. A lot of hunters in Malta will have something similar to this. So you can see there's a few ospreys, bee-eaters, night herons. Some of these, yeah, it's so what happened was when Malta joined the EU in 2004, all the hunters had to declare what they had in their taxidermy collections, but because they hadn't been checked up until that point, they were coming up with lists where, for example, they might say they have 5 osprey, but no one was checking the list. In reality, they might actually have 2 ospreys. So that actually gives them the chance to get another 3 osprey. So creating this list actually allowed hunters to shoot protected birds and make it look like it was legal. And there's 500,000 birds declared on these lists. And this is something that we know we need to tackle. It's not something we've managed to properly delve into properly, but this will be something that we're going to start focusing on, because we know that taxidermy is the reason behind a lot of the poaching that goes on in Malta. So I organise these camps twice a year, the Spring Watch and Raptor Camp, and we invite volunteers from overseas to come and help us, basically. We're a very small team here, so we do need help, especially in the peak migration times. And they go out twice a day, morning and afternoon, and they look for signs of wildlife crime. They try to gather the evidence and then report it to the police. They always work with someone from BirdLife or one of our more experienced volunteers. So newcomers are never left on their own. Yeah, and this is just a typical scene in the countryside. It's nice because you also see things that maybe you don't normally see. So sunrises and sunsets every day, and not to mention maybe some bird species that you've never seen. And okay, so yes, so as I mentioned, we do these camps to collect footage of wildlife crimes and evidence. This is something that I managed to film in spring. This is this was taken on the 16th of April, which was the day before turtle dove hunting became legal.
Yeah, there we go. You just shot. There. It's down. Yeah. I swear it's shot down. The guy was putting it up. His gun was about to pick it up.
Is it still working? Am I okay?
Alice, it was quite jumpy. We're now looking at a raptor in flight view.
Okay. Okay.
From the.
Okay. No, that's good. Okay. I'll just go. No, actually, I'll keep on this, not to mess anything up. So that case was a hunter. He shot down a turtle dove. It was during the close season for turtle doves, but we managed to get the police to him, and they actually found him with the dead turtle dove in his car. Plus, I have on video him doing it. So this is a court case that's pending, and yeah, hopefully this guy, the evidence is very strong, so I don't think he will be able to get out of this one. And yeah, hopefully it will result in a good fine and a license suspension as well. Yeah, as I was saying, so during the camps, not only the nice sunrises and etc., but you do see some nice birds as well. So, sorry, lesser spotted eagle and black stork. When these birds show up, there is also an element of panic because we know that we have to follow these birds and make sure that they leave the island safely. Yeah, so just to talk about bird trapping a little bit. So the picture you see here, this is actually one of our cases as well. This was someone who was found. So as I mentioned earlier, they can trap legally song thrush and golden plover, and then finches they can catch but release in theory. But this man was actually found with short-toed larks, dunnocks, robins, plus finches. I think yes, yeah, that was it. So and yellow wagtail as well. So it just goes to show that if the opportunity arises, they will often take it as well. And this is a view from above. So this is a very typical trapping site. You see the two net runs either side where they would put the nets on the ground, and they can spread over quite a lot of the countryside. And we actually put all the trapping sites together in one area. We just imagined how much land there would be, and we worked out that it would be roughly the whole area of Valletta, which is the capital city. So we are talking a vast amount of land which is used just to create these trapping sites. And sometimes they're on protected Natura 2000 land. They can also be on garrigue, which is a really rare habitat. Plus, also not to mention the fact that they use herbicides to clear the land. And yeah, this is a picture of a trapping site close up. This is a very typical finch trapping site, so it's slightly smaller than a golden plover site, which is much larger in size. And you can see there's the small stone platforms, and these are used for putting the live decoys on. And yeah, this is a case that we had where finches were being imported from Sicily into Malta. And we managed to get information that this was about to happen, so we passed it on to the police, and they did actually manage to intercept this. And I can't remember exactly how many birds there were, but I think it was near 200 finches that came through, and I ringed and released them all. So, oh yes, and I mentioned earlier that electronic coolers are illegal. In case you don't know exactly what it sounds like, this is to give you an idea.
2020, down at Eleonora Lighthouse. That's a really trapping site at the very end. You can see a corner here. Corners all around.
And these are very hard to police. I did report this one to the police, but by the time they got there, of course, all the callers are switched off. But if you are successful and they do manage to catch the hunter or the trapper, it's a €250 fine on the spot. And this goes up if they're caught more. Okay, so I mentioned as well that we have a rescue service and a rehabilitation service, and most of our birds come from members of the public. Unfortunately, this is a cuckoo that we picked up in the spring, which is someone's house. She found it in her garden. This is a common kestrel that someone found on Gozo, and a yellow-legged gull as well. And yeah, this bird unfortunately did not survive this. This wing is beyond repair. But if we do get a bird that's recommended for rehabilitation, sometimes they can be with us for a few days, or they can even be with us for up to a year. Because Malta is on a migration route, it means that if we receive a migratory species in the summer, we can't necessarily, sorry, in the spring, we can't necessarily release it straight away, even if it's ready. If we've missed the migration period, we have to keep that bird until the next suitable migration season for that bird. So we've got a marsh harrier at the moment. It's been with us for a year because unfortunately I wasn't quite ready for the last migration. So now we're into the next one. Yeah, we can have these birds quite a long time. And then when we get the bird, we take the bird to our vets. And this is a bee eater. This was also confirmed shot. And this is the bird having an X-ray. So these X-rays are really important because then we know exactly how the bones may be broken and if they can be fixed. And yeah, this is the final stage, and this is the best stage, of course. This is a merlin. We get very few merlins every year, and this is one that we had, and we managed to rehabilitate it. And then the birds get ringed. So yeah, this is the bird being ringed. Then on this particular day, we didn't just have the merlin to release, but we also had several common kestrels as well. And we release these birds on Camino. If we can't get to Sicily, we release them on Camino, which is the bird sanctuary. And I'm just going to end on a nice video. This is one showing some of the bird releases that we have done. So there are ways you can help us. One of which I would say is you can join one of our camps, the Springwatch or Rats camp. I know some people have the opinion that you should boycott Malta because actually you don't want to give your money to a country that treats the birds in this way. But all I can say about that is actually if you boycott Malta, you're actually doing exactly what the hunters and the trappers want. They don't want to see people in the countryside. So actually the best way you can help is actually to come and be there in the countryside and help us actually investigate and identify wildlife crime, and then we can report it to the police, and that will help actually make a difference to the situation. But of course, I recognise not everyone would want to be in the field and maybe not able to. So another way you can help is actually join BirdLife Malta or make a donation. So yeah, that's it. Oh, sorry, I thought there was a slide at the end. That's the end.
Thank you,
Thank
Alice.
you.
Thank you very much indeed, Alice. I'm so glad you finished with a series of quite uplifting sequences after what was really quite a sobering talk, and that may, I'm sure, be reflected in some of the questions you're about to receive. But could I ask to begin with, I mean, how much support and cooperation does BirdLife Malta receive from the general public in Malta? You did give some examples there where it appears you have many members of the public on your side and willing to contact you and do their best for injured birds. Is that generally the case, or do you find a lot of antagonism?
No, I would say so. One thing to bear in mind is actually the majority of the Maltese are not hunters or trappers. There are 12,000 hunters in Malta, which is actually the highest density across the EU. So for sure, there is the tradition ingrained, and you can see that as well. One thing I didn't mention was there was the spring hunting referendum in 2015, and they did vote narrowly to keep spring hunting. And a lot of the public had the attitude of, well, I don't hunt myself, but I believe in tradition, so I'm going to vote to keep it anyway. But I think since 2015 and the fact the situation has got worse, actually lots of people are waking up and realizing actually they wouldn't vote that way again if they had the chance. And we are seeing more people want to get involved, and more people are happy to call us and say if they found an injured bird, even report a wildlife crime. It's quite normal now. We receive letters in the post, maybe anonymous, but they want to tell us stuff, but they don't necessarily want to get involved themselves. So I would say the public support is actually quite high. We just struggle to attract people to actually get actively involved.
Is there any likelihood of there being a repeat referendum in the near future?
Yes, although I don't think for a few years, to be honest.
Are there any other questions, or are there any that Gary you can articulate from the chat?
Nigel, could I just to develop the question you had? I mean, you asked the question about the general public, but specifically in terms of bird watchers, is it an activity that you find in Malta? I mean, are Maltese residents interested in bird watching, or another aspect, which is digital photography? It seems in the UK and China and various other places, there's been a huge growth in the people who are interested in wildlife photography, and birds form an important element. And in some ways, that has actually developed a wider interest and more pairs of eyes that are looking out for bad practice. So what's the position? And you said 12,000 hunters. How many active bird watchers or photographers might you have on the island?
Yeah, this is another problem we have. So yes, 12,000 hunters, but I think I know all of the bird watchers in Malta. I've never actually really counted, but I would say less than 100, I would say. And there are some very keen photographers. And yes, we also have hunter photographers as well. So you don't necessarily see hunters out with their guns, but with cameras. And I mean, that's good. If they're out shooting the birds with the camera instead, that's great. But yeah, we are we're not as numbered as hunters. And this is one thing that is a problem, because if a rare bird comes to Malta, for us to see it first is less likely than them seeing it first. So it's always a problem. And last night, actually, I was speaking to one of my colleagues, and he said something that I thought was quite interesting. He's Maltese, and he said when he was growing up, neither of his parents come from hunting families. But when he would stand on the roof with binoculars, his dad would say, "What are you doing? You don't get anything from bird watching." Whereas the attitude is with hunting, you do, because you go out and you look at birds, but you can actually take something home with you. So that is still actually quite an ingrained attitude. The fact that going out bird watching, you don't get anything from it. So it's, did that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, yes, it's fascinating. I just wonder in some ways whether photography might actually fulfill a hunting instinct. Or, I mean, many bird watchers, well, some bird watchers, not many bird watchers, some bird watchers, you know, there's such a gradation in the UK from people who will be very happy watching garden birds to people who are twitchers who would go right across the UK or internationally to build up a life list. So people fulfill, in some ways, fulfill a interest in different ways. But it's disappointing, isn't it? Just how little interest there is in wildlife in that way. And does that actually reflect in wider wildlife and sea life? Is the same attitude prevail?
Yeah, I would say so. We do have problems with illegal fishing as well. Some hunters are also fishermen, so we know that they take stuff from the sea that they shouldn't as well. But for sure, birds is more ingrained. Even if you go down the streets here, it's really normal to see houses named after birds, and usually they're named after birds that they particularly like. So I came across a few houses yesterday. One was called Osprey, one was called Pintail, one was called Goldfinch. So you can kind of already know what these people are into. So yeah, it's very ingrained here in the culture.
Alice, you made it very clear that taxidermy underpins a lot of the poaching. Could you say a little bit more about that and how widespread is the taxidermy market? Are we talking just within Malta, or is this does this trade then extend to the rest of Europe?
Actually, that's something I didn't mention in my presentation at all. So we know that hunting tourism is actually very popular as well in Malta, and we do have issues with hunters, and we've heard this as well, that they're getting really fed up with hunting in Malta because they have the likes of BirdLife and cabs as well in the countryside who are reporting them to the police. And actually the fines given out here are actually really quite high. So we know that there's a high proportion of hunters actually traveling overseas for hunting as well, especially to places like Egypt, where they can go. It's definitely not as regulated. And then somehow, we haven't figured out how, they're getting carcasses back from Egypt into Malta for taxidermy. So it's not a matter of necessarily the Maltese hunters selling the taxidermy to other countries, it's more getting them into Malta and then into their collection.
So it's quite an international hub for taxidermy, and
yes,
I hadn't realised. Any other questions?
Nigel, could I just ask? I mean, it's obviously, I mean, you and your colleagues, I'm sure, are incredibly brave doing this as well, because I guess that some of the relationships you have with the hunting community can't be particularly enjoyable.
No, they're not. Yes, we do occasionally come across aggression in the countryside, and I have a pending court case at the moment, because some people were verbally and physically aggressive to me after I reported a finch trapper. So you just have to be careful in this job, and unfortunately it's part of it. We're there trying to stop them doing stuff they want to do. So the aggression does come as part of the job, but obviously we try to take all precautions necessary to reduce the risks.
Yeah, there's been a few questions in the chat. I think one of them you've just answered about, do you feel safe doing your work? You've kind of just answered that one, I think. But a couple of others I'll combine are, are the law enforcement agencies doing their jobs in prosecuting the wildlife crimes, and to what extent are the authorities actively fighting wildlife crime?
So the situation differs between islands. In Malta, we have the EPU, which stands for Environmental Protection Unit, and they are there specifically to fight wildlife crime, and we have a really good relationship with them. So Malta, I feel it's positive, but when you go to Gozo, it's different. They don't have the EPU there. They have district police, they're basically the local police in any local police station, and they're not trained on how to fight wildlife crime. So we definitely struggle on Gozo when it comes to reporting wildlife crime. But yes, luckily the situation in Malta, I feel, is actually very positive. And even when we get to court as well, the magistrate, she really likes what we're doing, and yeah, I think we have a very good relationship with her as well.
I've also been asked, as a question from in the chat, are songbirds served in restaurants? That happens in some countries, doesn't it?
Yeah, so for the quail and the turtle dove, they shoot them because they do like to eat them, but it's not a matter of them being served in the restaurant. It's more, you would have a group of hunters, they would go out shooting quail and turtle dove, and then they would gather together and just, make it into a stew or something. So it's more social eating, if that makes sense, like a private social eating rather than commercial in the restaurants.
Okay. And is there a schools program to perhaps change the attitudes of future generations? Or is that happening anyway?
Yeah. So we run an environmental program. It's called Dinya Wahda, which stands for One World. And yeah, it's the education team here. So it's not something I'm personally involved in, but they try to cover all of the primary schools across Malta and Gozo. And then also the secondary schools. So they run out these environmental programs in the schools and try to get the children to actually, value the wildlife that they have and value what there is in Malta. And it's actually a very successful program. So hopefully in the next generation, we will see a shift in attitude.
And so the last comment in the chat at the moment from Rachel is, thanks for the talk and what a great job you're doing.
Oh,
you're all doing, should I say.
Well, here, Alice. That was a super talk, very sobering, and really good for us all here at home in Wales to have a first-hand, quite hard-hitting account of bird crime in another part of Europe. Sobering because it's really brings it home to you how attitudes to wildlife and the natural environment generally can be so varied across one continent like Europe. My wife and I were enjoying the delights of marsh harriers this afternoon here on Anglesey, where everybody that saw them was full of awe in watching them and delighted by it, and everybody had their best interests at heart. And we applaud the RSPB for creating that habitat that's now so suitable for them. Whereas you're at the other end of the continent where that isn't the case, where indeed the natural human tendency is to think quite the opposite and to treat such birds as targets. And that takes a lot of grasping. And I think when you bring it home to us, like you have done this evening, with a direct articulation, your own words and the video clips that you showed were really powerful. They're upsetting, they're worrying, and they make you realize that whilst there might well be overall gains for conservation in some countries or across a continent like Europe, there are certainly still hotspots where it's anything but satisfactory. Clearly, it would be far worse if you weren't there. And I think everybody in the audience this evening will have a deep sense of gratitude and admiration for you and your colleagues, because what you do takes some doing. And every day you run risks and you encounter scenes that must be upsetting, deeply disappointing from a conservation point of view, and downright physically dangerous for you. So it is fantastic work that you're doing and deserves every bit of support. And I really hope that you gain that support bit by bit, generation by generation, through the work you do on the ground and through the talks such as the one this evening, which has been so excellent. Some great footage showing the island and the problems and the birds brilliantly well. So congratulations for all the photography and the filming that I know you did a lot of. I'm glad your message about visiting Malta has come over strongly, because I, for one, have so often felt I would rather not go, so as to, in a sense, send out a message that I don't agree. But I can clearly see from what you've said that is the wrong attitude, that we should go and we should help you in monitoring what's going on there, and make a point that many people in Europe still want to see live birds and enjoy them tremendously. So every strength to you and your organization. It's a wonderful organization, and I hope you gain more members and more donations by your talk this evening and those in the future, and that you gain a lot of self-satisfaction. I can well imagine the feeling of success and satisfaction you get from releasing the birds that you've had to take into care, or from stopping or prosecuting trappers who you catch red-handed. Thank you ever so much for taking the time this evening.